Expanding Mind with Erik Davis, Thursdays at 2 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network.
Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, and we're going to continue our hydra-headed exploration of human consciousness and experience for the next hour. One of the things I've been thinking about in terms of today's guest, whose name is Anna Biller, is the interesting relationship in our culture between religion and sexuality, or spirituality and sexuality. Because at the beginning, when you first look at it from the outside, they're going to want to pretend they have not much to do with one another. Religion's all about, finding that higher spirit away from our animal nature, or transcending the lusts of the body is a kind of classic Christian idea. But as Jeffrey Kripal points out, he was on our show about a month ago, he talks about how all the big issues in the news about religion, with the exception, or at least partial exception, of terrorism, all concern sexuality. The scandals in the church, in the Catholic Church over pedophilia, the enormous struggles in the Anglican Church over women priests and gays. You start to realize that the sort of policing and management of the body, and particularly sexuality, actually lies at the heart of religion, even traditional conservative religion. And then if you kind of stray into the more alternative realm of spirituality rather than religion, to make that important, if somewhat squirrely distinction, you find that there's of course much more interesting and on the surface relationships between these two things. There's still the emphasis on asceticism. People will enter into a spiritual path and hold their refuse to have sex or become kind of purified, and they'll have that. But at the same time, there's a lot of room in the alternative spiritual realm for more aggressive embraces of eroticism. One thinks only of the whole bizarre, in some ways ridiculous, in some ways sort of marvelous spectacle of American neo-tantra, for example, where tantric traditions from Hinduism are twisted, expanded, elaborated on into a spiritualized eroticism. So much so that in Marin County, for example, probably most of the prostitution that goes on in Marin County has a glaze of neo-tantric spiritual healing on top of it, so that one does not go to a prostitute, one goes to a temple goddess or something of that sort, because there's this mixture and fusion of the energies called up through these more alternative spiritual practices and eroticism. So really, the more you go into the fringier sides of religion, the more you see this dynamic dance between sex and spirit, which will be, at least in part, the topic for today. We're going to be talking to Anna Biller, who's a filmmaker, and she's most known at the moment for her film Viva, which came out a few years ago, which is a classic, loving, and very meticulously done and humorous homage to the great sexploitation movies of the 60s and particularly the 70s. And it's a delightful film, and some of her new work is taking her in the direction of witchcraft and sexuality, which is a topic that is definitely going to interest our co-host Maja. I know, Maja, you've been exploring the realm of sacred sexuality in your studies, and who knows how else, for quite some time. So how'd you find out about Anna?
I met Anna at a group art event that I was involved in called, oh man, I can never say it, Pekachuka or something. It was a Pekachuka thing where they have a bunch of different presenters and everyone does things. And I did a series of alchemical images, and then Anna did, she showed some pictures from her upcoming film that she's working on, some of her sketches, and I heard her speak, and I just thought she was brilliant and was able to talk about that schism that happens between sexuality and spirit and how it affects specifically women. Obviously it affects men too, but for some reason throughout history women kind of get the short end of the stick, so to speak, as far as that goes, because they tend to take all the blame for any kind of, movement in that area. But yeah, for me, I'm interested in it and studying it in a sort of revenge against Descartes kind of way, because whenever you start talking about sex and spirit, then it becomes this argument, well, you can't have God in your body, right? So for me, my interest in it is that, having a sacred sexual experience is literally about incarnation of God in your flesh at that moment, and also shared between two people. So I try to look at it that way, in that unification of matter and spirit in a kind of alchemy way. So that's like most of my research into the area goes into there. And then when you start reading about witches, I mean, that's, it all becomes vilified, and an experience of God in the flesh is something which is heretical and demonized, and then the witches tend to take the brunt of that.
Well, great. So let's bring on Anna. Anna, thanks for joining us here on Expanding Mind.
Hi, very happy to be here.
Excellent. So I'd like to start off just talking a little bit about Viva. I mean, it's hard when people haven't seen it to appreciate the juicy, creative lovingness that went into the sets and the costumes and the situations. I mean, it's really quite a rich invocation of what was a very interesting era in pornography and the representations of sexuality in cinema and in American culture in general. So, what drew you to that project? What drew you to the 70s as a kind of inspiration for your film?
Well, my films and my short films and my theater and all the work that I've done in my life has all been about female sexuality and about, more generally, about female pleasure and female desire, because, I feel that there's a real lack of female pleasure on the screen. And even, a lot of the movies that are geared towards women aren't really about pleasure in a strange way. They're the movies that are considered important films for women. And it seemed like that's something, because of the male gaze of the female body and because of the way that we're trying to get away from objectified images of women in more contemporary type of cinema, that we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We've taken away the pleasure. So I was just trying to go into an area where it was the most hypercharged area of like cinematic, sexual erotic pleasure that was intended for men, and try and see if I could shift that towards being pleasurable for a woman, for a female spectator. I thought the way I do that is by making it kind of personal, but also by sort of copying those genres that were genres of pleasure in a way, that provided visual pleasure. So to not take the pleasure out, but not to make it too feminist, too dry, too didactic. So I started looking through old Playboys, and I found that there was almost a kind of an irrational world of pleasure that was created that was almost kind of mindless, but very pleasurable, very much designed to enchant a man. I thought, well, I could take the world of Playboy, the visual world of Playboy, and combine it with my own personal experiences and my feelings about what it is to be a woman navigating through her own sexuality, and put that together and make a movie out of that. So I literally tore out ads and cartoons from Playboy, laid them out on the floor, and created a story from those images. And the images were like, a boss and a secretary, prostitutes and a madam, all the cliches, nudist comedy. I took all those images and I made a story out of like a world of Playboy, which is an unreal world that only exists in the world of Playboy, didn't really exist in real life. And then tried to combine that with what it's like, I think, to be a woman trying to figure out her own sexuality, her own desire.
Well, I want to let people know that there's clips of the movie online. You can just do a search on Anna Biller and Viva and come up with be able to see some portions of the film. Because what makes me interested is how, when it came to shooting these scenes that are fantasies, and there's clearly a sense of kind of loving irony about them. It's very clear that they're artificial. They were never true even in the era, and then here you are kind of reflecting on a different era of film. So there's a lot of the element of camp in it, which makes it fun and pleasurable. But specifically when it came to the character or to the sex scenes or to whatever dimensions of it, how did you try to shift it away from the more traditional cinematic language of having the woman be an object of desire? Like, how did you try to make the main characters unflowering more a feminist tale?
Well, I just took it from my own feelings and my own experience. So I think, a lot of sex movies and all that stuff comes from male consciousness, is geared towards a male spectator. Whereas I think a lot of the stuff really is just opaque to women. Like, they just don't get it. Like, they're just not turned on by it. Like, it doesn't do anything for them. But women have their own erotic life. They have their own, believe it or not, they have their own fantasies. they have their own things that turn them on. They have their own situations that make their heart beat, things like that. So I'm just trying to take this all from the inside rather than from the outside, and that's one reason I decided to play the character, so that there wouldn't be anything artificial either about the performance. So I gave myself very little dialogue, and I just tried to place myself in those situations as if I was living in them. And that was one reason it was so important to create a world that was so exactly like a world that's like a movie or like a layout from that time, so that everybody would not be acting. So nobody would have to act. Everybody would just get in the clothes and get in the environment, and they just feel like they were there. And they would just kind of start experiencing something and start living in that world. And things would start to happen. I wouldn't have to tell people to do anything. They would just kind of become a certain way. They would sort of feel a certain way. So it was a little bit like a Gestalt therapy to put myself in those situations. And then, again, some people complain about the film that it's not progressive for women because it doesn't show a woman with triumphing in terms of finding her sexual, power or anything like that. But that was part of the realism of it. The realism is like, this is how I experience sexuality in a way, is that there's an attempt, like almost an exhausting attempt, to try to find desire, your own desire, where you're not given any space. And I kind of feel like the 70s especially like that for women. The idea is that the doors, the floodgates open for women to express themselves sexually, but it's still, you're dealing with gender. So you're dealing with men who want to control the situation, men whose desire is stronger and more intense and more aggressive and dominating, and that men are used to being in that position, women are used to being in a passive position. It's very difficult for women to actually express themselves in those situations or to actually have freedom, because you're dealing one-on-one, with other people, like with men, and that's sort of what it's about. It was about how a woman who's already, she's totally prepared to experience her sexuality and to go out there and do something, feels very stifled and very beaten down.
Well, it must be
it's
very
interesting because to deal with that, what many women, not all, but to deal with that, what many women do is they go to the opposite end of the extreme, right? I mean, you get this dynamic which becomes either submissive or dominant, and then there's no meeting in between where two people can actually have an experience like that.
That's difficult, yeah. Because in a way, I sometimes I feel too that when women are dominant, they're also trying to please a man. Like they know that like a man that turns the man on, and that they're playing a role, and that they'll become sexually adventurous and sort of bend over backwards, literally trying to please a man by being really kind of sexually aggressive. Whereas, where's the feminine center? Like, where's the desire of the woman? Where's what she wants? Yeah. Like, does she really want to be that kinky? She might want to be, but she might not want to be. She might, Well,
and most of the time with dominatrixes, I mean, it's a reaction against some kind of abuse they've had, so it's really not even their desire. It's more of like a reaction against physical aggression.
Yeah, usually also, and also with prostitutes. And the idea is that the problem with the dominatrix is that she's being commanded to dominate. She's being ordered to dominate, and she's being paid to dominate, and she's got a client, and he's the one in control. So that's not really being in control.
Yeah, that always struck me from the doms that I knew that it was a really good line as sex work goes, because one of the ways that men would reassert their power after going through these experiences is to pay a lot of money. So it's not just that they pay; it's that they can pay a lot.
They can pay a lot.
There's sort of a fringe benefit there, although obviously the dynamic is clearly a challenging one.
I had somebody write me once on MySpace begging to be my sub, and I asked him point blank. I said, "But are you submissive enough to have a relationship with me where I don't dominate you?" He actually didn't understand the question. Are you submissive enough to be equals in friendship with me? If I should demand it, he instantly lost interest. You see what I'm saying?
So I have a question.
Because that's what I would want. See, I was thinking I would want to have a friend. I wouldn't want to have a sub. But see,
they're not submissive enough to give in to your desire.
Yeah, what I was pointing out to him was that he was dominating the situation, and that if I would dominate the situation, I would have a friend and not be a dom. You know what I'm saying? But he wasn't interested in that because he wanted to control me. So I was actually just pointing that out to him. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I'm curious if you bring some of the desire to have a pleasurable, to invoke pleasure. It seems to be something that motivates your set and costume design as well, at least in Viva.
That's all. My visuals are all about pleasure, and actually the character is really trying to find pleasure as well. It's just that I'm very interested. I'm interested in psychological realism very much so. So I don't want to make a fantasy world where the fantasy is there's an unrealistic situation. Actually, the settings were realistic, too. They were just very colorful. So I don't like to go into a space that can't be believed, because I feel like drama is created out of believable situations and believable characters. So even though the characters are colorful, they were all kind of stock characters. They were believable characters in settings,
Did you find that
it's sort of the opposite formula to how a lot of Hollywood works. They make outlandish situations and unrealistic characters and not psychological realism in very ordinary settings. I like to flip that.
Yeah. Did you find that some people, or that it was easy for people to kind of miss the deeper goal of the film because it was so, playfully campy in relationship, so knowing about the era, and so it's so easy to be just sort of enjoy it as this funny reflection on the era? Or do you feel
that's not? I mean, that's built into it. Because it's like I created in layers. So the first layer is the pleasure layer, and it's a comedy layer. And if you want to get it just on that level, that's not a mistake. I mean, that's actually. I don't like to. Again, I didn't want it to be didactic, and I didn't want to force people to have to watch something that has some kind of political message and that they have to sit there and be lectured to. I don't think that's the kind of film I want to make. I want to make a film that makes people feel good. I think that that the other layers are really underneath, and they're more in the kind of feelings underneath, and so that especially women will get those. Usually, almost always women will get that, and men almost never will. And that's fine because it's.
I like how you presented it that way, because then what happens is you're not being the dominatrix in presenting this film. By doing it in that manner, you're not being like the aggro feminist. It's like a reaction to that kind of pornography, which is what happens so often. And instead, you are truly expressing this, how about if it's just fun for the woman, and it's not this back dom reaction to it, but instead it's done in a pleasurable way.
I like men, and men are people too. Men hold up half the sky.
Totally.
I mean, I love men actually, and I'm not trying to diss them or be angry with them. I actually want to bring everybody into pleasure, but I'm trying to make. I think it's less of an irony. It's more of a satire. It's a social satire. It's about how people have a hard time because of who they are, getting along in the world and understanding one another. I think gender is one of the big comedies and big tragedies of our lives, and so I like to deal with how gender misunderstandings. That's a big, that's a big tragedy. And in the next film, it's even much more about that, So it's like, so whereas Viva is about how it's a man's world when it comes to sexuality and sex and the controlling of what happens sexually, and a woman tries to go into that world and she's a bit out of her element, This next one is about love, so it's about how love is a woman's domain, and men are the ones that get screwed when they try to enter that world.
Oh, right.
It's really about love, and so it's so like a man trying to go deeply into love the way a woman goes into love is going to end up being hurt the way that a woman gets hurt when she goes into the world of sex. So I think, and there are a lot of confused and crying men that are under a spell. They're destroyed by love, and I think I have a theory that men actually are very susceptible to love, and they have very deep feelings, and they're very emotional, maybe even more emotional than women, and that their hard exterior is a bit in a way to protect themselves from a lot of things that may enter in, and that a woman who comes in and is able to make them feel that love can actually sort of kill them, destroy them. That maybe that's a fantasy, but that's the premise of the film. And I think one thing that women tend to have forgotten, and I think this is partly through social oppression, and this is what Erik was talking about at the beginning of the show, is that female sexuality has been tamped down. That was one of the liabilities of the sexual revolution, is that female sexuality started to gain ascendancy, and people became afraid of that, I think even more than male. Male sexuality is not as threatening to people as female sexuality. I think that.
Well, you had mentioned that. I was reading that in your blog. How one of the things that you said is how black magic is about eroticism, but also the primal fear of women, and that was something I talked about when I talked with my friend Sarah Timms on the show about that Sigmund Freud paper, The Medusa Head, where they're literally like afraid that vagina is going to bite off their penis, right? It's that tooth vagina thing, and that when there is that kind of ascendancy, that the woman would have some kind of pleasure during sex, that it's not like a punishment. Then this fear comes up that is like a driving primal issue, and that's why I really liked how you stated that with just the rise of the sexual revolution, that it kind of spurred that and fed the fear.
Yeah, I think men and women are really basically terrified of one another in different ways, and I think the male is afraid of being engulfed by the mother's love, by that love, that makes him not a man somehow, makes him a baby, or makes him not able to face being a man, the challenges of being a man, going to war. And I think a woman is afraid, but also I think that a man. I think one reason, we're living in a very puritanical time right now, and I think it's unfortunate that women have discarded their own sexuality, thinking that sexuality is the man's domain. Like they've given it up. They've given up their own sexuality in a way, and their own desire, their desirable images and their sexy images in many ways. They've given that up to men, because that's the most powerful thing that a woman has on a man. And women don't like to admit it, this is why women who use that are considered whores and witches and bitches, and men are very terrified. They desire those women. They're very terrified of those women because those are the women that have power over them. So part of my film deals with how this is like this witch has discovered that really is a key to the man's heart. If we can unlock their hearts through their eyes, through their desiring us, through their wanting us sexually, then we can open their hearts to love. And so she has a way of working on men to get them to fall in love through their desire, sexual desire.
When is the film set?
Well, I was toying. It's really kind of a 70s film. Basically, the way it's written, everything about it is pretty 70s. But I may set it now just because it really doesn't have to be set in the 70s. It might be sort of a strange hybrid, like, because it's very current. I didn't want the handicap of having people just be so obsessed with the fact that it is a period film and think that the issues aren't current.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That actually comes up with a lot of 70s stuff, I think, because in some ways I believe our era is kind of echoing the 70s in a lot of ways, and it's tempting to see things in that mirror, but at the same time it makes it easier for people to step aside from it because, of course,
tons
of witches now, just as there were then. But at the same time, when you look at the media, when you look at the way that witchcraft entered into popular consciousness in the late 60s and into the 70s, it's part and parcel of the same erotic opening that you were reflecting on in your last film, just in a more, hippie, more spiritual, more kind of intense way, but it's part of the same process. Like if you look at the materials in the book and the films, it's like the images are also charged with the same kind of eros.
Well, witchcraft in the 60s and 70s, the main difference, as far as I can see, is the imagery. Was they were much more theatrical with the imagery, especially with the nudity, and especially with tying witchcraft in with the sexual revolution in a very direct way, and female sexual power, and that was emerging. And I think that we're not as innocent anymore, so we know a lot more about, we have history, the weight of history, so that there's a movement away from all of that, because it didn't work or something in some way. Like all that didn't work.
Well, yeah, it's interesting to reflect on the history of witchcraft in the modern era, which in some sense is all the history we really know about. Because it began with such a strong emphasis on ritual nudity, like traditional modern Wicca has this core embrace of ritual nudity, and then that nudism becomes part of what gives it a sort of erotic flash as it enters into the larger stream of countercultural explorations in the 60s. But as you say, now it evolved and split and changed in so many different ways, and in a lot of situations it no longer has the kind of ritualized nudity that it did in the 50s because, frankly, nudity doesn't have quite the same charge anymore. It was incredibly charged in the 50s.
I mean, I think a lot of times religions do reflect how people just live, and so now people are much more into herbs and, getting back to nature and making things and having, so it's much more based on ways that people live, organic and, like things that are more in our lives, but I think like nudity was a huge part of, nudism was a huge part of people's lives that were trying to be alternative anyway. I mean, there were just so many alternative groups that were embracing nudism in the 60s as a form of countercultural expression and as a form of rebellion, and as a way that they really found that it gave them freedom. Now, like, nudism is associated with so many things that people don't want to be associated with, like that was before the porn industry took off and everything. So there weren't those associations,
Well, how did you feel? Like, I know for you, like you said, Viva had a lot of personal stuff in it, and I know that you did nude scenes in the film. What was that like for you? Like, was that gnarly, or was it something that, did you have to grapple with it, or how did you feel doing that?
I'm very shy, and I'm really, it was really hard for me to do it. But I had to set myself out from the work when I looked at the footage, I had to look at it as if it wasn't me. And when I started doing that, so the first time I did that, I shot it two ways, one with nudity and one without nudity. When I looked at the footage, I realized it was a real cop-out to not do the nudity. It really seemed wrong, and it really seemed dorky, actually. So I thought, well, I guess I just have to do it, and I just have to look at this as, because I would make, if I'd been casting someone else, I'd make that actress do nudity, and I wouldn't hire her unless she did it. So I realized, well, I'm the director.
See, that to me makes your film have kind of like this shamanic aspect because of, like you said, how you wanted it to be based on your own experiences, and you really got into the moment when you were in it, including the nudity. Like, that makes it, and it's weird that you would say that you would separate yourself from it when you're watching it, because to me, like, it felt like I was like, wow, that she would go, that dedication to having the experience makes it a very ritualistic performance.
It was very ritualistic, and my performance was different than anybody else's in the film, because everybody else who did nudity in the film was a nudist. It was somebody who's very comfortable with nudity, who'd done nudity before, who'd done it on camera, and was really happy to drop their clothes in an instant. I was the only person who'd never done anything like that, and who was very freaked out by it. So I think the shyness and the reserve that you see on the screen, that's not acting. The fear, almost like the terror, and also the eroticism, I think, of you know what I mean? So I went back, I kind of went back into being a teenager a little bit, into feeling like, first sexual experiences and all that kind of thing when I was playing it. So again, I think that's on the screen, and I think that makes it a bit uncanny, like you say.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's an authenticity to the vulnerability of that character that really comes through and sweetens the situation, and also raises the stakes and makes it less of just a romper room. Well, we're on Expanding Mind here. I'm Erik Davis, and on the Progressive Radio Network, and we're going to take a short break here and be back with more discussion.
This is PRN, Progressive Radio Network.
The shaky economy, peak oil, and now an unstable climate. Get the inside story with Alex Smith on Radio EcoShock. Top scientists find a looming catastrophe while activists try for change. Experts, authors, and alternative media from around the world and around the corner. Hear it all. Radio EcoShock every Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Listen free and live free right here on PRN, ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com.
Hello, this is Erik Offner, your host of the best jazz show on the air on Progressive Radio Network, Eric's Sounds of Jazz, every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I play the best jazz ever recorded by Louis, Sidney, Bessie, Billy, and all the others. Remember, Progressive Radio Network, Eric's Sounds of Jazz, every Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Freedom News Hour will bring you up to date on the latest news on the financial meltdown.
Begin restoring local communities. It can happen.
We'll be exploring the issues from a freedom-oriented, small government perspective.
I'm Walt Thiessen.
I'm Melinda Pillsbury Foster.
I am Jake Town.
Join us live Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com.
Join us, Bruce and Marianne Curtis, Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Progressive Radio Network for Truth and Freedom. We present provocative conversations with the world's most brilliant minds in the areas of holistic health, spiritual wisdom, politics, and a host of other topics. Some of our topics include the latest work in non-invasive therapy on the brain, the truth beneath the global economic meltdown, healing power of the breath, and the sublime truth beyond all religious traditions. In this age of transformation, we need to look beneath the surface appearance of things to see the underlying reality. For material that is always illuminating and often liberating, tune in to Truth and Freedom on the Progressive Radio Network, Fridays at 3 p.m.
Listen to Of Consuming Interest every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm Jim Turner, attorney in Washington, D.C., chairman of the Board of Citizens for Health. Every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, we discuss a topic of consuming interest, often about health, but also about politics, commerce, and whatever the current topic of the day might be. Of Consuming Interest, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, on the Progressive Radio Network.
The Progressive Radio Network, your premier progressive radio station.
Welcome back to Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. Me and Erik are here talking with Anna Biller, the wonderful filmmaker and lady extraordinaire. And Anna, it's so fascinating to me that you had that experience with your nudity, just because, you know, part of your next movie, The Witch, is about how she finds power through her anatomy, and that the witch in general throughout history is kind of, it's the realization of the woman who has power with her sexuality, and that literally can translate to their bodies, and how many women, not all, but lots of women are taught to be ashamed of their body and their anatomy. And for me, this is something I've done a lot of thinking and research about, just because when I was in school, I did some, like anatomy studies. I dissected people and stuff like that, and I found that one of the biggest things, and I know people kind of get tired of hearing me talk about this, but a big thing is the removal of a female sexual organ that's actually left out of many anatomy textbooks, which of course is the female prostate.
You mean you dissected actual human bodies?
Yeah, that's right, because I was doing pre-med studies, and there was females actually have an organ called the female prostate, which is what's responsible for female ejaculation, which of course is what would give us equality in our anatomy to men, because that's like the whole Freud thing is like penis envy and that we can't ejaculate, when in fact that's totally not true, and we actually can, and that there has been a part of female anatomy that has been dismembered from our knowledge and from our bodies. And I was just curious, like, in your experience of going through the shame of your body, if after the film, if you came to realize a power and a comfortable kind of sense of your body, and if that was what inspired you to kind of go into the Love Witch story, where she realizes that she can have desire through her anatomy. I was wondering if you yourself had that realization, and if that is kind of where it stemmed from.
Well, that's very astute of you. That's exactly right. It's interesting that you would pick up on that. Yeah, so I was never interested really in erotic cinema before I made this, and I actually wasn't considered, before I made Viva, I actually wasn't really, that wasn't in my radar really. I started watching, when I started looking at Playboy, at first I was a little bit horrified and very ambivalent, and I thought, well, that's good. It's good that I'm ambivalent. It's good that I have feelings of terror and shame and looking at the female body, and I'm going to go through that. I'm going to go through that process and see where it takes me. And I didn't know where it would take me. I didn't know how I felt about it. But I found some directors whose work I really loved that were softcore directors, especially Radley Metzger, who treated the female body with a kind of a reverence and treated women like goddesses, and there was nothing shameful, and everything was really, really great, really expressive, and I felt the right way. And I started, realizing that a lot of the stuff that I thought was kind of ugly was actually kind of great, for the 60s and 70s, involving nudity and stuff. And then I experienced, a sort of a little epiphany on the set, and I started to get comfortable with nudity. And also, the day we shot the nudist colony scene, the energy was amazing on the set. Everybody felt more, when everybody dropped their clothes, suddenly there was this wonderful energy. Everybody seemed much more serene and trusting of one another. And, the crew suddenly got nice because everybody was so vulnerable without the clothes that everybody became more gentle. And there was actually no sexual energy on the set, which was interesting because people became less sexual and less aggressive because they were all trying to protect each other.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the great secret of nudism. I mean, you feel this both even at a, in some ways wildly erotic event like Burning Man, is that you go there and it's shortly after being there for a while, it's like it becomes no big deal, and actually just kind of a way of just being comfortable in your openness. And I've also talked to old Marin County hippie freaks about the early hot tub scene. And they talk about just how incredibly, powerful and transformative it was to have this social ritual that was not particularly eroticized, that allowed everyone to take off of their armor, their social status, and just become kind of one in this way.
I used to think all that stuff was just kind of hippie cliches.
Yeah, it's not.
I used to think it was just like sort of bad cliches about, we all become one, we all shed our, I was kind of thought, okay, that's just, I thought, okay, that's just something, people say in order to get women to take off their clothes, right, but actually, being there, it was very different, felt very different, so I was humbled in many ways. And I started to see, and that's also what started to get me into trying to understand male sexuality, which I think many women will just never do in their lifetime, because it's just that's sort of the enemy, male sexuality. It sort of comes at you and you don't know what it is and you don't want to know. And I think, well, how can we find our own sexuality if we're heterosexual anyway, without knowing what his sexuality is about? Because and that's another thing that brought me to love, which is trying to understand male sexuality. Actually, there's a lot about male sexuality in there. Focuses more on their feelings.
So what have you been discovering about witchcraft in your research, or what is it about the kind of contemporary witch experience that you want to bring forward or sort of express to the audience?
Well, I don't know what you mean by the contemporary witch experience, really, but I think my interest in witchcraft has to do with the fact that it's so historically always been so female centered, and it's so much about women and their power, either personal, sexual, or social, and about how socially and sexually that power has, they've tried to kill it, and they've killed many women. But how that that the witch is a metaphor, I think, for how people view women in general, and the fear that people have of women, and of the personal power that women can have.
Well, it's so funny because it's so true. Like, the witch is literally an archetype that's been placed upon women for everything that's horrifying about them. Like, that's what. Right. And it's ironic because the actual word witch, the etymology of it, comes from someone who is wise, that has a direct connection to divinity, literally through their bodies. So when you look at the actual definition of it, it's someone who can access divinity in a very wise way. And the problem is that that's terrifying to people, really, is what you're looking at.
Because women having power, and because we live in patriarchy, and because any way that a woman can get power is not good in the patriarchy for the patriarchy. But, the other thing that this film is about, which I haven't discussed, is a little bit about mental illness. And I think, I know that's a negative thing, but I've got some mental illness in my family, and I'm interested also in things like about how difference can actually make somebody crazy a little bit. They might already have some craziness in them, but like being different and being other and being outside can be an experience, and how not having love can kind of twist somebody, so that the main character in this film is not a positive character, even though the other witches are. So it's like the backdrop is that the other witches are very positive, and they're Wiccan, and they're very, very nice, and they're very spiritual. But the main character has problems, and I think that part of her problem is that she is very angry, and she is very angry about patriarchy and about being abused, and about not having love, and so she doesn't use her witchcraft in a responsible way.
Well, and that is a big issue, right? Like, the idea of a witch is fearful is not based on nothing at all. I mean, traditionally that's the danger of having power, right? That you can use it in a way that is not responsible and to hurt people.
Yeah, and so the idea, but also there's this idea that if a woman's, that I'm trying to, it's very complicated what I'm trying to do, but it's sort of like, I'm trying to do this split thing, kind of like I did with Viva, going from the inside and the outside. I'm trying to be able to look at her from the inside and from the outside. So the idea is that that men experience her just as this perfect sexual, fantasy vision, but what's inside of her mind is like a nightmare, But it's also because she doesn't live in reality. So it's also about the dangers of people not living in reality. If people go too far, or people using religion in the wrong way. So the idea is that in her mind, it's all, she thinks she's all wonderful, like it's all unicorns and rainbows and magic and wonderfulness. But
and that is a big part of witchcraft,
that is very
right?
Dark. A lot of darkness.
That's a big part of witchcraft, because people don't realize their desires in reality, so they turn to witchcraft to try to realize the desire in some kind of fantasy world that they create.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes my experience of a lot of people who are very deeply into certain alternative religions has been that sometimes they don't understand what they're doing or who they really are, or what they're really, like that there are many very truly spiritual people, and then there are other people who are kind of scary.
Words of the wise.
And I guess, okay, maybe that's the theatrical Hollywood side of it, that you make a witch and you actually make her kind of scary, but, you know. But this is me trying to also sort through issues of mental illness, which I've always interested. Like, I love the movie Repulsion.
Oh, yeah, it's so good.
Which is about an extremely beautiful woman who man just lusts after because she's so beautiful, but the darkness in her mind is very terrifying, you know. They can't see what's in her mind, but in a way, you know, my character's a bit like this. Like, she has a lot of darkness inside of her mind. But the men who have their own limitations and being only able to access her physical beauty, see, that's their tragic flaw, is that they can't see who she is, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the man's first nightmare, is in a way is to be so drawn in by female beauty that he can't see who the woman really is. He can't see her, right?
Yeah, there was a point in my life when I started to reflect on, as much as I could, my assumptions about beautiful women, particularly ones who were confident, not just seeing someone walking on the street, but when actually engaging with a woman who was attractive and confident in her you know, social performance. And I would notice that there were certain assumptions that I would make that I wouldn't make about, you know, a woman who was not so demonstrative or more plain looking or something. Mm-hmm. And I was became aware of these, that there's something special, you know, beyond the sheer fact of beauty, some moral quality or some greater insight or some greater connection to the universe or something like that. And it was really kind of a startling process of almost like consciously, you know, kind of undermining a lot of the assumptions that I would make just because of the sheer fact of beauty.
It's very hard for men, I know.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I'm done. I'm just saying that I noticed it.
No, you've made a lot of progress if you're aware of that, but it's very hard for men. So here's, you know, the premise is that a beautiful, confident woman can wreak a lot of destruction with men because of that, because of those assumptions, you know.
They can literally start wars and ruin entire countries.
They can ruin. And in a way, I have to say that I have a fantasy about that. You know, like, and I don't know, I mean, I sort of, in a way, this is a woman's revenge against patriarchy, to sort of be sort of titillated or sort of have enjoyment over men being destroyed in that particular way. So it's like a woman's version of a horror movie, you know. I mean, it's like, it is sort of a horror movie because people do die and everything, but, you know, it's sort of like, it's the way, so in the sense of like me being, you asked earlier, well, what is it about me making a movie that's different than a man? It's like, this is a female fantasy of what a horror movie is, right? It's like the woman has all the power, but she doesn't actually really do anything violent. It's just she has her powers, you know.
It's like Dalida. I don't know if you know who Dalida was. She was a very famous singer. She was Egyptian-born and then got famous for singing in Paris. Excruciatingly beautiful and amazing voice, and men would fall in love with her. And 3 of her male friends and husbands committed suicide.
Right.
And it's like that. Like, I always think of her when I think of, like, that's the microcosm of, like, the strength is that it was
really
through
the
her.
Fatale, too. It's like the archetype of the femme fatale, and, you know, Lola Montez was like that, and many women in history. And, you know, I watch a lot of old movies. I watch a lot of noir films, I'm really more interested in classic cinema, so this is a hybrid, too, of my interests and all kinds of things. A lot of them come from cinema, from trying to bring back an older kind of cinema as well, where women had all this power. I mean, I'm just so entranced by all the old movies and all the beautiful women and all the power they had over men. Yeah. And I really love that. And I think those movies were enjoyable for men and for women, you know, because they had dimensional characters, you know, that were...
One movie that I'm thinking of in this conversation, I just watched the other night. I'd seen other films by this underground filmmaker from the Bay Area named James Broughton, who was also a poet and a gay activist. And he started out making, he was actually bisexual, and a lot of his films from the 50s really celebrated the body, so he was kind of part of a sort of aesthetic nudism, and he made these very kind of poetic films. And then in the 70s, he made one called Dreamwood, that is this remarkable, kind of sexy, kind of funny movie of a total pagan sort of fantasy. Like, it's clearly done with people who are really into witchcraft. They shot it somewhere in Muir Woods, or somewhere in natural environment, and it's this really poetic exploration of the connection between sexuality and a kind of spiritual journey. And it sounds like a little, cheesy hippie in a way, but it's not. It's actually very witty and kind of uncanny and a little dark, like some of his films were, Cocteau praised them or whatever. He really had a poetic ability. And it's interesting how there's something in that moment there too of that overlap of Eros and the mythic imagination. So I'm curious, like in your film, how much are you going to try to move into that mythic world of the witch,
I'm all about myth. I can't get. I mean, it's, if anything, I have to struggle to keep things more contemporary and more current. Because it's myth it's all about. It's very, very mythical, very much so. Yeah.
That's the great thing about myth, is that they are contemporary. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, I look around and I see people's lives and they tell me stories. I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally, Uranus and Kronos, or like, it's unbelievable the way that the myths replay in a constant circle, everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, the beginning of my cinema practice, when it really took off, was when I read years ago. I read Laura Mulvey's essay, Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema. Do you know that essay, you too? But it was about how there wasn't a visual pleasure in narrative cinema for women. About how in narrative that the male, it's all about the male desire, and the women have to kind of be either narcissistic or masochistic to identify with the events on the screen. And it was a really provocative essay in the early 70s, and it had a lot of effect on feminist discourse and theory. But I kind of didn't agree with a lot of it. And then again, she went back and revised some of it, and that's a long time ago. But I kind of thought that some of the old movies, like some of the old Hollywood cinema, really was for women. Like it was more contemporary films. Did have that lack of pleasure for women in cinema. And I think that one thing is, going back to myth, that the mythic structures, I think, were very much for both men and women. And when we got into the movies more in the 60s and 70s that people thought were cool, like all that Godfather stuff and all the stuff that was really, where the girlfriends and wives just became accessories and sort of not important anymore to the stories, and where female sexuality wasn't important, and where all that stuff was just discarded, is where movies became really uninteresting to me anyway. And so I tried to go back to the earlier more mystical movies.
It's true. I was talking with a girlfriend of mine about pornos, and how we were like, God, why can't they make like some kind of, at least like a plot or some kind of visual, pleasurable thing in pornos for women too? And I also was talking about it with some guy friends, and when I talked about it with my guy friends, they're like, plots in porno? I was like, why do you need that? Like, the only thing it's about is when she gets it. And it was just like ridiculous, because I was saying how it's very difficult for me to relate to many porns. Well, first of all, because they're just like kind of gross, but then also just that there's an entire aspect of female sexuality left out of pornography, which then men never get any kind of access to. And so the idea of ladies making pornography has always been very interesting to me. And like how you did it, how you just switch it around like that and include it. And so that both men and women find it good that way. It's like men, I don't think, did you have any guys say that they like didn't like how it was presented, or they didn't like it?
Many guys don't like it.
Oh, interesting.
Actually, I mean, a lot of guys do like it, but a lot of guys don't like it because they're actually lacking maybe the single ingredient that they watch a film like that for, because it's not exploiting women, and it doesn't have male protagonists that you can see the world through his eyes, and it isn't catering specifically towards their pleasure, although there is And I didn't cast it for bodies. You know, that was the other difference. Is I didn't cast women. Like this one girl came up to me. She was going to be nude, and she was complaining about her breasts. She said, "Do you want to see my breasts to make sure they're okay because they're a little unconventional?" And I was unconventional. Would ask me such a question, and I said, "I'm sure your breasts are fine. Whatever. Who cares?" You know. And of course, the male director would go, "Yeah, let's see your breasts." And maybe if you didn't like them, you wouldn't cast her. But see, again, you know, that woman was you know, had a spirit about her that I loved, and I was going to cast her. You know, she was beautiful, and it was like, what? You know, you mean your breasts aren't right? I don't care. What do you mean? You know what I mean? So it's like I'm not thinking like a guy, but you know, there is an erotic women. Yeah, different things turn women on, and the porn industry doesn't cater to women. Do you like Catherine Breillat's work?
Oh yeah, totally.
Know? Yeah, so she's someone who does that, but I think men tend not to like her work as much. A lot of men, because it's starker.
I know they can't. It's more terrifying for them.
Well, what is it, Roger? Can you
explain? Huh?
What can you describe it?
Do you want to, Maj, or you want me to? She does these films.
Go ahead.
Well, she does these astonishing films about female sexuality that are very, very daring. Like, they're actually X-rated, but they're not considered pornography because they're not there to titillate the man. The film I like best of hers is called Romance. And it is a little like Viva because it has this young woman whose boyfriend is not interested in having sex with her. He's this really good-looking guy. And she goes out and she has a bunch of affairs. And one of the actors that's cast in is Rocco Siffredi, who's a porn star. And it shows his erect penis, and I think it shows penetration, all this stuff. But it's not a turn-on for men. It's interesting because it's all about her experience. So they'll have an entire sex scene played just on her face. And she's talking through the whole thing. So you can't ever get into a space where the man has his fantasy life because her words...
He's literally coming face-to-face with her during the experience instead of removing her.
Yeah, and so you're dealing with her words, and so she's constantly talking through the entire time they're having sex, and so that for a man, he can't get away from the personality, from the feelings of the woman ever. And if it's not her talking, another movie she'll have like a voiceover going constantly, or like, you know, or somebody reading something, and so it's the idea is that you're constantly aware of the mind and the desire of the woman at every single moment, which a lot of men are just hate her films because of that.
Well, yeah, because they want, with pornography in general, right, it's about removing yourself and going into fantasy and not being in the experience of having sex at all. And many men, when they're having sex with their girlfriends, will be thinking about pornography and not paying attention to their girlfriend at all, you know.
Yeah, and then and so she's really daring with what she shows and everything like that, but it's all about this woman trying to find this erotic time, and these men aren't completely giving it to her because they're not. And then there's this really kinky thing where she gets with this older guy, and they do all this S&M stuff, you know, when she likes it and she wants it and everything, but she's crying through the whole thing because she wants it but she hates it. So it's like, you know, it's about this woman. It's about this woman's experience going through all this and not about the men being able to get off on it. And so the way she films is very clever. But, and then it's interesting how her boyfriend, who's this handsome guy who doesn't want her, is feminized through the whole thing. He's feminized by, because he doesn't want to have sex with her for one thing. It's sort of, he's a bit gay that way, but also he's an actor. And the very first shot of the film is a close-up of him being powdered. And he's dressed, I think he's a matador. He's in his bull ring. He's doing it just a fashion shoot because he's a fashion model. And so it's being powdered, and she's gazing upon him, and she's like she has all this lust for him because he's so good looking. So it's interesting the way she's reversing all these things, like who's the object of desire and who's going out and doing the conquest.
Yeah.
But the women are still very, very feminine. You know, they're not masculinized in any way at all. They're vulnerable and they cry. And all this kind of thing's very interesting. You know?
Okay.
Very
well, folks, you've been listening to Expanding Mind. We've been talking to Anna Biller, who is a filmmaker, and you can check out some clips from Viva online, and then check out the film at your obvious places. And Anna, good luck on The Love Witch, and thanks for joining us here.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Okay.